Hey everyone, I'm Justin Drager.
And I'm Tim Maggio.
Welcome back to the Productivity Playground podcast, where creativity meets efficiency in work and life. This is a show where we dive into how top performers from all industries balance productivity and creativity. And today we're excited to have a very special guest, Daria Torres, a strategic advisor, thought leader, innovator, and a personal friend and colleague. But first, let's jump into recess.
All right. Ring, 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 ring.
Okay, Tim, how you doing this week?
I'm doing really good. The school's really back in session. I have a lot of free time in my house to kind of just do whatever and do work and do jujitsu.
Tim, I can't help but notice with this free time you've cut off all your hair.
I did cut off all my hair. It started to kind of, when I was driving, when I was sleeping, when I was training, it was like in my eyes and in my face. And I just
So was it the jujitsu that ultimately resulted in you cutting off all your hair?
I would definitely say that was like 90% of the decision because I wanted to compete better.
It feels like if you wanted to make a decision about cutting your hair off, you would have done it at the beginning of summer, not the end of summer.
I have heard that feedback that I've got a summer haircut for winter time,
Right.
And I'm choosing to ignore that feedback.
All right, I hear you. We can have selective hearing when we want to. All right, let's jump into a topic I've been thinking a little bit about. I want to pose a question to you. What do you think is the purpose of memory?
I mean, I think it's an opportunity to just kind of look back at the things that you enjoyed in life or didn't enjoy and just kind of reflect on those and learn from those and become the current or future better version of yourself.
I'm going to pick up on the last part and ignore all the meta stuff you just said for a second, Tim.
Okay.
Because I think a neuroscientist in a Harvard Business Review article put forward a theory that I found really interesting and said that the evolutionary reason for memory is so that mammals and other living organisms with memory can predict the future. And it reminded me of a story of a dog that resonated with me. The story is, and I think it's been memeified at some point, but the story is like the woman's taking her dog for a walk. She walks out her front door. Her dog found, when the dog was like a puppy, a slice of pizza in like the bush outside her house. And now, 10 years later, every time she takes that dog for a walk, they must always visit the pizza bush because the dog has embedded in its head it found this grody, disgusting slice of pizza 10 years ago. And as I walk my dog, there are like these places where my dog has found the most disgusting things we must always check in with.
Right. It could be there again.
Yeah, it's clearly built into my dog's memory that like, oh, I once found this amazingly disgusting thing here and I must always check in with it. And it got me thinking about, in this article, and the neuroscientist talks about, then why is it that every time, not every time, but a lot of times when we go and listen to a speech or a presentation, like 4 hours, let alone like 4 days or 4 years, do we forget most of what we literally just attended?
Right. It kind of reminds me of like those moments that are like the most embarrassing moment of your life, and you'll just be like sitting on your couch and that memory will come right back into your head. You're like, why can I not forget this?
Well, and on the one hand, it's sort of comforting to think that most people will not remember a presentation they just sat through. So when you're remembering your most embarrassing moment, like, or something stupid you said yesterday in a meeting, which I tend to do, and a lot of people tend to ruminate on like, God, why did I say that? The stakes are pretty low because most people do not recall on a day. And the longer your life is, the less things you'll recall because your brain's filled up with all these other things. On the other hand, if we are the ones trying to communicate, it can be sort of disheartening that you've put all this prep and creative work into a great speech, a great presentation to the board, to your boss, to your colleagues, to your subordinates, to your kids, and nobody is listening or remembering all the great things that you just shared. So this neuroscientist, taking cues from neurobiology, put together sort of like the ways to communicate effectively so that folks will remember Tim, why don't you run us through the list and let's see if any of these stick.
Right. And, basically our goal is to figure out how we can make people start looking in bushes for pizza.
That's the goal.
Got
Right.
it. So essentially what this neuroscientist did is he came up with 4 steps, which are 1, chunk it up, 2, make it concrete, 3, provide callbacks, and 4, spark curiosity. So chunking up this article, how would we do that? And essentially what you got to think about is, what is your baseline message that you want people to understand? Essentially, it's a cheat code for knowing that your brain can take up to like maybe 4 takeaways when you go to that 4-hour presentation. But the cheat code is, 1 takeaway doesn't necessarily have a definition of what that takeaway could be. So he gives a really interesting example where, a neuroscientist, probably when he's at parties and different spaces, is always asked, what could I do better to have my brain work for me? And he used to have like this list of 10 things that people could do. And he started to realize, why is nobody remembering these 10 things that I'm telling them? So he basically just boiled it down to one message. What's good for your body is good for your brain. And essentially what he's saying is, okay, the United States in this context already does a decent job at educating people about like what are some healthy general things that you can do for your body. So since you already have that understanding, I can just say, what's good for your body is good for your brain. And people can contextualize that and say, oh, so that means exercise, eating right, and doing the things that they already know are chunked into that one message.
So fewer things chunked together.
Fewer things chunked together. I think car mechanics, which get a bad rep, they might do this well. You go to your car mechanic and it's your 100,000 mile tune-up, and they say, hey, it's your 100,000 mile tune-up. We've got a bunch of things that we got to do in order to make your car safer and work better for you. And maybe you want to know what those 10 things are, but I think most people are just like, just get it done, right? It's going to make my car work better and it's going to make my life safer. So they've chunked up that material for you to basically say, what's good for your car is good for you.
Makes sense.
So then you want to make it concrete. So our brains are really good at understanding abstract thought, but we're not so good at remembering those abstract ideas. So in a story and a character, our brain can understand what brave is, but we all have a different concept or idea of what brave might be. So you're going to want to use concrete things like, the person in the story risked their life to save a friend from a burning building. Or if you're trying to be more organized or you're trying to be more productive, what you might want to say is that you've implemented a new time management system and daily planner. So you really want to come up with those direct examples that people can have concrete ideas of that visualization of bravery or that visualization of organization. Our third thing is callbacks. So repetition is king when it comes to memory. So remember, we talked about chunking, and chunking is really
that
good.
Feels like a callback.
You see what I did there, huh?
Yeah.
So our brain can only take four takeaways from this presentation. So remember, instead of 10 things for your healthy brain, you just want to remember what's good for your body is good for your brain.
Got it.
And then lastly, you want to spark curiosity. So essentially what happens when people are listening to a speaker that they either wanted to attend, maybe were required to attend, is what you want to do is spark that curiosity and find what was that gap in knowledge that they're missing. How is this going to matter to them and really be important to them? And when you're able to do that, essentially what our brain does is it has a spike in dopamine. And dopamine is basically like a steroid for your memory. You get this dopamine charge, and then you're like, wow, I'm really curious. I really want to know what the answer is to this gap in my knowledge. And it turbocharges your brain into memory performance. So if you can get all those 3 things done, really chunk the message, provide that repetition, and make it concrete and spark that curiosity, then ideally, if you're presenting for 4 hours, 1 hour, 20 minutes, however long it might be, I hope you're not presenting for 4 hours. But those are kind of the 4 things that you want to employ to make people remember.
That's helpful, Tim. Sometimes the best way to spark curiosity is sort of to make a linkage creatively or ask a creative question and get people engaged and thinking up front, maybe some unexpected result. Really helpful tips. Hopefully people will use these as they think about the next time they need to communicate effectively. And with that, let's jump into the sandbox. we're really thrilled to welcome Daria Torres to the show. Daria is someone who's mastered the art of navigating really complex sectors like healthcare and government, driving innovation while managing really strict boundaries. She's a respected advisor, a strategist, a thought leader. And personally, I've had a front row seat watching Daria bringing together people in some of the most maybe tense negotiations imaginable. Sometimes those have been around like negotiating through tough federal regulations. Other times those have been around stakeholders who seemingly have everything at odds over business goals and outcomes. But I've really seen Daria use a lot of her IQ, EQ, communication to bring people together. And she's also used those at top institutions like Wharton and served on numerous boards and played a key role in groundbreaking market advancements. She and her consulting group have been around for 20 years. I consider her a friend, a mentor, and I'm really glad that you're here with us today, Daria.
Well, I appreciate that intro, Justin, and just as thrilled to be here with you and Tim. And you've certainly set the scenes for a high drama conversation, possibly.
Well, what the reason I wanted to have you on and talk to you is because we talk to all sorts of people. Some folks are highly creative, some folks are super productive, but you kind of need this nexus of both. And particularly for someone like you who is both an entrepreneur and then having to engage with clients who sometimes are really at odds, I wonder if you can sort of talk to us a little bit about how you play a defining role in groundbreaking all of these deals, market advancements, sometimes in heavily regulated sectors. How do you do all of this and approach it with both this balance of creativity in highly structured areas and driving change, which means some level of like productivity, grinding it out?
Yeah. Having an engineering background, I'm so tempted when I hear questions like that to start thinking about variables and formulas. But I have to tell you, I don't think there is any perfect or repeatable recipe for what you're describing. I do, however, think that like a master chef in a kitchen who looks at the ingredients available, who sizes up the people who will be around the table having that meal, and perhaps also the setting for that meal, assembles a set of courses, stages them in a way where everyone can enjoy what's coming out on the plates and digest it, react to it, enjoy it together. And so I think about my client work, I think about my time in classrooms and boardrooms in a somewhat similar way. I am using the ingredients available. I'm thinking about the resources I have, much like a chef would, and the environment that I'm cooking in, and who will be eating. And ultimately making sure that what comes out on the other end is, something nutritious that people will enjoy and delivers the value ultimately that we need it to.
So divide up for us, how much of the prep work are you doing is really, I'm preparing this meal. If I'm sticking with your metaphor, I'm preparing for this meal. I'm thinking about all the ingredients. I'm doing all the beforehand homework. And how much of it is on the spot spontaneity then?
Oh, there's something I would phrase as pattern recognition. And pattern recognition, I think, is both a gift and potentially a trap. So in advance of any client engagement, be it at the outset of a multi-month engagement or in the days leading up to a day-long retreat, you're doing that preparation. You're thinking through what could happen. You're anticipating scenarios. But then in the moment, you're trusting on your instincts and your pattern recognition to say, okay, this is something we didn't quite anticipate. What does this look like that I've seen before? And again, back to that, what resources and ingredients do I have? What can I now do to make the most of this moment? And so I do think that takes time. It's something that it's hard to train other people to do. I think that's why the apprenticeship model in my industry is so important, because, seeing and experiencing it in different contexts and trying it in different domains is really how you get better. But there is no perfect answer there either. I wish I could say there was.
Let's stick with that for just a moment.
Yep.
So these are skills that a lot of people are looking for because they're skills that they'll use in their day-to-day jobs when they're navigating really complex relationships or trying to bridge divides within their departments or their organizations, or trying to be thought partners to leadership or other stakeholders. So are these things that can be learned? And if you were bringing on an apprentice at your consulting group, what are you looking for? Are you looking for the creative? Are you looking for the technical expertise? Are you looking for high IQ, EQ, communication skills, all of the above, the unicorn? I mean, what are you looking for?
I was hoping you would give me an all of the above choice. So thank you for that. But what I think is always important in this game is, and for any of us who are in business, is prioritization. So you're asking me a question, which essentially is a prioritization question. I would put at the top of that is are you coachable? Have you shown evidence that you learn quickly and you enjoy learning? That's probably at the top of my list. Second, I would, if I'm ranking, this is real time, I'm on the spot, high drama, I would put listening, right? I mean, we talked a little bit in advance of this conversation about where it might go, but so far we're a little off script here.
We're way off script.
But
Yeah.
I'm listening. And I think it's so critical for people to actively listen, meaning actively listening to me is holding off on thinking about what is coming next so that you can fully absorb what is coming in. And I think that's critical. I think another thing that I would put, if I had to say three things as my top, I'd say ability to collaborate and problem solve in a collaborative setting. So that requires a whole host of other things underneath it. But I think those would be my top three.
Yeah. And so those are skills that you think people can hone, develop, learn, no
Yes,
matter
I
what
do.
role that they're in. Yeah.
Yes, I do. And I think there are a lot of ways to do that. There are a lot
For
of
example?
tools at our disposal. Yeah. So for instance, if we're talking about listening, there are various techniques there to train your ear and your mind to be more focused on understanding and reflection versus responding and reacting. When we're talking about collaborative problem solving, there are tools like brainsteering and the 6 thinking hats, which are two of my go-tos. And coming all the way back to the beginning, the learning aspect, that's the whole point of this, right? We're saying, can it be learned? Well, if that's the number one skill, certainly we would see evidence of someone's trajectory around that. And I think there are also questions you can ask a person to surface whether they have an appetite for learning. Right? What's the last new book you read? What's the last new dish you tried? What's your favorite way to push yourself, past a boundary? So I do think that there are ways to develop your skills in each of those areas.
Yeah. And I noticed that in all these questions, you're sort of sparking curiosity in the other person. You're showing interest in them and they are reciprocating. And sort of you're bouncing off one another. Let me. One of the ways that I've most engaged with you professionally is watching you negotiate between different parties who might be, or at least are set up in a way to potentially be at odds, or at least they might at first have different outcomes in mind and try to bring these parties together. That's sometimes negotiating over federal rules or regulations. Sometimes that's different business partners that are trying to reach some common goal or end, but at first don't appear to be lining up very well. In those sort of situations where you're the negotiator or the moderator, or you might have a better word for that, but how do you approach that in a way that gets at the prioritization that you're talking about, keeps things moving productively, but infuses perhaps novel or creative solutions that obviously these parties haven't been able to get to without your help?
Yeah. So I appreciate that question because it's one of the things, it's bringing up one of the things that I love to talk about, which are frameworks that really grease the skids, if you will. in these kinds of settings where, as you highlighted, there might be competing priorities, there might be opposing perspectives, polarity around important things. I mentioned a few moments ago, one of my go-to techniques is the 6 thinking hats. I'll explain it just briefly to illustrate a key point, okay? In this technique, each of the 6 thinking hats is a different color and represents a different thinking style. For instance, red represents emotion. Yellow represents benefits and optimism. Black represents hesitation, drawbacks, consequences. White represents facts and objective thoughts. Blue represents process. Green represents creativity. Now, as you think about each of those 6 and add them all together, you say, wow, this is really covering the gamut of ways that you should be tackling a discussion in a group setting about an important decision. What generally happens, though, without a structured approach is people's ideas are colliding and people's styles of communication are also clashing. So there's both a process or style aspect to this and a content or substance aspect to approaches like this that help to cut through the mire and provide a way to essentially extract some of the things that the obstacles that get in the way when groups are trying to do important stuff in tricky settings.
Yeah, so sometimes I think people think creativity means sort of the sky is the limit and structureless. And the truth is, some of the best creative thinking still requires some sort of structure around it, whether it's a framework with the 6 thinking hats or other structures that sort of get you to some level of prioritization or goal alignment. There's a structure that's leading you along the way and then sort of allowing you to branch out.
Absolutely. There's structure and there's also pragmatism, right? We have to bring into the conversation. So I'd mentioned this other approach, brainsteering, where one of the ways they suggest thinking about innovation or developing novel ideas is to imagine perfection, right? If there were no constraints, if there were no boundaries, what would be possible? But then after you do that, you have to layer in some of that pragmatic thinking, the practical constraints, so that you know that with the resources you have, back to that original point about ingredients and resources, what can we actually produce? So I completely agree with you.
I want to hone in on something. Your mantra, as I understand it, is when is the last time we did something for the first time? And I'm wondering if you can talk about how, it strikes me as sort of a creative, productive, one of those creative, productive nexus points. How does that philosophy influence you on a day-to-day basis, or maybe it's a long-term philosophy for you?
Sure. No, you're right on. And there is, Justin, both a day-to-day aspect to it and a long-term element. I think this philosophy encourages constant innovation and pushes you to seek out new challenges, no matter how small they might be. It also keeps you, and that's on a daily basis, it also keeps you from getting too comfortable and inspiring you to be always on the lookout for new frontiers over the horizon in the future. So that mantra, I would agree, indeed, is about creativity and then acting on it. And I think it emphasizes curiosity as well, because you have to find new ways to persevere and push through and be persistent. So I'll give you one example of this. I'm attempting again in 2025 to complete a marathon. Keyword there again, an attempt. So
All right.
My first attempt was 2023. I was able to go about 19 miles. But
Wow.
that when is the last time you did something for the first time? Even though I'm attempting a marathon again, I'm taking a new approach.
Okay.
Right. So the day-to-day is going to look a little different, and the long-term, hopefully that goal will be met to complete the marathon with some additional nutrition planning and weight training.
Well, we're cheering you on.
Thanks.
So we'll be following. Let us know how it goes. We're in your corner on this one.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, you bet. Although I just want to say, I think 19 miles is a feat unto itself.
Very respectable.
So, yeah.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, you bet. All right. Daria, because you're sort of you're the managing partner of this consulting firm, reached a major milestone with 2 decades this year. But I also sort of see you as sort of like a corporate marriage counselor a little bit. I don't know, because, I think CEOs, C-suite executives use you as an outlet. You sometimes have to get different firms to talk to one another, and sometimes there's fallout. So I don't know if you see yourself that way, but I sort of see you that way. And I wonder, when you're talking to like a startup or 2 firms that are maybe trying to merge or post-merge, culture sort of merge maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, when you look at all of these, what common threads do you see in these sort of successful ventures? How do you help others harness these traits we've been talking about? And can you sort of see like they're on the right track, even though it's bumpy right now, and this one you have a lot of concerns about?
Sure. Well, first off, while you may never see the subtitle corporate marriage counselor on my bio or anywhere else, I totally understand the analogy. And I do see, common themes over and over in successful ventures and successful people. I think they're marked by leaders who are resilient and pivot when they need to. So they can weather storms and they recognize where they need to make adjustments. So maybe this is taking us back to the marriage counselor analogy. But I think the inverse is also true. I mean, ideas are very abundant, opportunities are also, but how do you take all of that and say, there are challenges we face, there are changes we might need to make, but when do we make them and how do we make them? And how do we come out on the other side better, either as an organization, as a team, or as a partnership, if that applies?
So it's sort of the assessment and everybody's heart's in it, and how do we improve?
It's that, and I think it's the, how do you keep your focus on execution while at the same time recognizing that there may be different routes you at some point may need to go down. All right.
So that's the resiliency, the pivot, the ability to change, adaptability sort of side of the equation, the creativity.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. This is my final question to you. And I kind of want to hone in on everybody's superpower in this regard. Every high performer has to be productive to achieve their level of success. You have to just get stuff done and achieve those creative goals, pivots, changes. And I want to know from you, what's the one productivity secret or habit that you rely on to just stay ahead, to keep moving?
Yep. Well, I will not hedge here. You ask for one, I will give you one. It is intentional reflection. Intentional reflection.
What form does that take?
It takes the form of, at this point, periodically answering questions in a journal. And those questions, the journal is called One Question a Day. It is a 5-year journal. I actually have it right here on my desk. Doesn't say who it's by, but I'm sure you can find it. A Castle Point book at St. Martin's Press. I love it. There are 365 questions in it that you may or may not go to each day and answer. But it allows you to see how your thought process evolves year to year with the same questions as the prompt. And I have just found that this is a really handy, efficient way for me to just take a little time every day with some guidance, right, some structure, to put my mind around a particular question and think about what it might mean for my next steps. So intentional reflection.
Thank you very much, Daria. Congratulations on your 20th anniversary of your firm and all the good work that you are doing. Thanks for joining us on the Productivity Playground. We're really glad to have you here.
I appreciate being here. Thank you so much.
We've reached the end of another productivity adventure. Big thanks to Daria for joining us. You can learn more about Daria at waltorresgroup.com. Now, before you go back to your to-do list, subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. Make sure you sign up for the coming newsletter, and make sure you follow us on LinkedIn and Instagram at Productivity Playground Podcast. Share it with a friend, and we promise to keep bringing you the most productive content out there.